morning, and welcome to Driving Force Radio, where we seek to discover what drives today's leaders. On today's show, my co-host is Kelly De La Torre, an energy attorney with ALG Attorneys. Welcome to the show, Kelly.
Thanks for having me, Jan.
You know, we have a really interesting show today. Typically on the show, we talk about traditional energy. And today we're taking a little bit different slant, right, Kelly?
I think it goes back to how we talk all the time. We like our electricity. We like to be able to get up and take a hot shower. We like to use our lights at night. We plug in so many devices. And I think when we think about electricity, we think urban. But what we're talking about today is more rural electricity.
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting show because I don't know a lot about this, and we'll be talking about rural development, and we'll be talking about something called an electric cooperative. And so that'll be interesting. And with us today is Lee Bouhey, the Senior Manager of Corporate Communications and Public Affairs at Tri-State Generation and Transmission Association. He handles internal and external project communications and public affairs strategies to advance the interests of the $4 billion electricity wholesale supplier. He also is the co-chair of Colorado's Energy Coalition. Welcome to the show, Lee.
Good morning.
Thanks for being with us. Thanks for being with us.
Lee, thanks for coming on the show. This is a topic that really interests me, and I think that the consumer really is interested in knowing where they get their electricity from, and we're excited to talk to you about that today. Could you give just a little bit of background on Tri-State?
Sure. We start with electricity. If you think about electricity, most people don't. We do surveys, we look at people's views about their electric service. Most people don't think too much about it. It's reliable, it's affordable, it's dependable, and it does so much work in our lives, at our homes, at our businesses, where we recreate. It blurs into the background. We forget just how valuable a tool electricity is, or energy for that matter. I think a lot of folks feel the energy in their lives more when you see the cost of gas today, the impact that can have on your pocketbook. But electricity is such a tremendous value for what you get out of it, the work it does, and utilities are a big part of making that happen. So Tri-State Generation and Transmission Association is the not-for-profit cooperative wholesale power supplier to 44 rural electric cooperatives throughout Wyoming, western Nebraska, Colorado, and New Mexico. What we do is we generate or we purchase electric power, we operate our transmission system, and we deliver that power to these small rural utilities who then deliver that on to their member owners. In that cooperative system, those member owners, they own their local co-ops, they own us, so to speak. We operate as a consumer-owned utility, really with the interest of the consumer first and foremost in our minds.
Well, Lee, I have a quick question because I know that the systems that Tri-State operates are throughout a 200,000 square mile area, and you have about 1.5 million consumers in this area. But how is a cooperative different than a traditional utility like an Xcel Energy or somebody like that? How's that different?
Yeah, the biggest difference is that we are consumer-owned. Back in the 1930s, you saw a tremendous boom in electricity in the grid throughout the country, but that was only in the urbanized areas. Those that lived in the farms and ranches, particularly out here in the West, were left out. It simply wasn't profitable for investor-owned utilities, for-profit companies, to go out, string out the lines, and be able to bring power to rural areas. So you had the Rural Electrification Act in the late 1930s, and a push to be able to ensure that you could fund the development of a rural electric system. Back then, about 10% of the farms had electricity. By 1950, after the big push for rural electrification, over 90% of farms and ranches had electricity.
That's crazy. So then you had all of this build out, this 200,000 square mile build out, or a substantial portion of it during that 20-year period?
Well, Tri-State was founded in 1952. And it was interesting, if you look at the development of electricity in the West and the rural West, largely cooperatives received their power from the federal hydropower system. But as rural communities grew and prospered, they ran out of power. There wasn't enough of that federal hydropower available for them to grow. So a number of cooperatives came together and formed generation and transmission cooperatives like Tri-State. Tri-State was founded in 1952 by about 15 of our members, and they created us to go out, aggregate their loads, find resources or build power plants, operate the transmission systems, and deliver them that low-cost source of power. And it's interesting, if you think about cooperatives today, the same conditions that affected rural areas 80 years ago exist today. Nationally, cooperatives have about 10% of the electric load in the country, yet cooperatives operate over 40% of the transmission. That's because we have to serve throughout low population areas, very spread apart, requires a tremendous amount of assets and transmission to be able to do that. It makes our cost of service a little bit higher because we have the added cost. If you look at cooperatives, our utility averages about 5 meters, 5 people per mile. If you go into our members' service territories in Wyoming and Nebraska, that gets down to 2 to 3 consumers per mile, as opposed to urban utilities like an investor-owned utility or a municipal utility where they have 35 to 45 consumers per mile. It's an entirely different dynamic, and it really takes a different type of organizational structure of a business model to go out and serve these areas, provide power, grow the economies, and do it in a reliable, affordable, and safe way.
Well, and I imagine too, with the ability to bring the rural communities online and create that rural development, that there is a lot of underlying value to these cooperative business models. Can you talk about that a little bit, Lee?
And there is a tremendous value in the model that we have. People come together in their communities. They have elections. They elect directors to their local utilities. Those directors run those local utilities in the interests of those consumers. They're connected to the community. They understand community needs, and they can come together and make decisions that help these rural areas. And if you look at the area where our members serve, it ranges from the wide open plains of eastern Colorado to the high mountain deserts in New Mexico, into the mountains of Wyoming. Every place is different. It's not a one-size-fits-all affair. And this cooperative business model at the local level really is able to structure utilities that serve their communities well. And then when you look at our organization, Tri-State, with our 44 member electric cooperatives, has a 44-member board. Every one of our members has one vote on our board, and they come together with us, their power supplier, and help us to make the best decisions that we can to ensure that we provide the product that they need, wholesale power, in a way that makes sense, is cost-based, and delivers that tremendous value. It works really well for rural communities. It's a valuable model. We're able to guide our decisions, whether it's on the resources that we choose, how we set our rate structures. All of those aspects of the utility industry, our board manages through our democratically elected directors, and it serves consumers well.
Well, Lee, I want to ask a quick question, because you keep talking about these electric cooperatives, and there's 44 electric cooperatives that Tri-State serves. What exactly is an electric cooperative? Is that a city, or what is that?
It is simply put, it's a company, a cooperative company that is operated by that is not for profit.
Okay.
It's operated by a democratically elected board of directors from those that it serves, and it returns, if there is a margin or a profit, so to speak, from its operations, it returns those funds back to its members. So it really does exist much like a credit union, or even REI is a cooperative. It really does exist to deliver a valuable product to the consumers that are members and make sure that they share in the value of the organization. There are 7 cooperative principles that cooperatives throughout the country and throughout the globe adhere to, and these principles really identify cooperatives and allow them to structure in this model that works, and it works really well, particularly in the West, for providing rural power.
Got it.
It's really remarkable. On this show, I have these aha moments, and so my aha moment for this show is how unique it is that you have this great relationship with these local cooperatives that really do know their terrain, and then they also, it must come into play sort of their power needs and how they can communicate that to you, because it must be different for all of those different areas depending on where they are and what their prime source of income is for that territory. So can you talk about sort of the economics?
Yeah, what they all do share is a desire to have an affordable and reliable electric supply. And that's what we really strive to do as the wholesale power supplier to cooperatives, is to make sure that we can operate efficiently, control costs, make the investments where they're needed, continue to build value for our members who own us,
Right.
And then meet their individual needs. And we do that a number of ways, beyond just providing a low-cost source of power. We look to how we can provide services around renewable energy, so to speak, or energy efficiency or demand-side management. And as a power wholesaler, try to give those utilities the tools that they need to be able to meet their own individual circumstances. I think a common theme with utilities, not just cooperative utilities, but investor-owned utilities, municipal-owned utilities, is that one-size-fits-all solutions don't work.
Right.
We have a tremendous diversity in the communities that we serve, the pop industries that we serve, the incomes, you name it. And we have to be sensitive and very thoughtful about those differences and make sure that we don't make decisions that don't serve all of our consumers.
So do you find that you have more large commercial users than a regular utility, because they're sort of, in my opinion, sometimes they're sort of outside of the urban areas?
Yeah. Only about 32% of the load that we serve is residential.
Oh.
Over half of it is commercial and
Wow.
industrial.
Oh.
And that separates us somewhat from other utilities. You've got a very strong base of industry in rural communities, whether it's agriculture, ranching, the extractive industries, in particular oil and gas, which is growing dramatically. So we work very hard to make sure that we're meeting the needs of residents, of consumers, that we can provide them a valuable electric product at their home. But we're also sensitive to the needs of industry and making sure that we can provide this valuable product that allows them to do their job and support rural economies. You know, it's interesting, for a long time, when you talked about electric co-ops and what really drove your business, some people would refer to, we want to make sure that we're taking care of the little old lady at the end of the line.
Yeah.
And that's still true today. But what we're very cognizant of is we've also got to make sure that we're serving the needs of the businesses and the industries in rural areas, because they're making sure that those folks at home have paychecks.
Right.
And we can't do things to our product that prices it out of what is economical for industry, or make it unreliable, God forbid, so that industry will move. We've got to keep our product valuable so that rural consumers, rural industries can use that as they see fit to prosper, grow the economy, and provide a better quality of life.
Well, and Lee, as we've talked here in the last few minutes, we've talked a lot about keeping the electricity affordable. And there seems like there's several threats that are going on out there in the communities right now, and with all the legislation and all the things that are sort of sitting there in the background that could potentially threaten affordable electricity. What are you guys doing over there at Tri-State to address these issues, and what are you guys doing with the cooperatives to really keep electricity affordable and there for the little old lady at the end of the line, but also the big oil and gas company or the big agricultural organization that's sitting out there in rural America?
As a consumer-owned utility, we listen to our members, and they tell us that affordability of electricity is the most important thing for them. And we operate in a way to try to ensure we can deliver that low-cost product. And you look at regulation, it's probably the biggest challenge that we see in front of us today. You know, the United States is the global leader in environmental regulation. with the Clean Air Act and the Clean Air Act amendments, we have seen tremendous reductions, real reductions in emissions from energy, not just from utilities, but from vehicles, from industrial operations. We've made great progress. And that is because we have a legacy of fair regulation, honestly administered, combined with strong performance from utilities and industry to ensure that fair targets can be met. It's achieved great results, even as our economy has grown, our population has grown. We've seen very real reductions in overall emissions. What we fear today is that you're seeing more regulations being put forward that are not based in sound science, that aren't being administered fairly or to the letter of the law, and to us, and most important to affordability, are taking away choices for how utilities can meet regulation. You know, utilities, you can look at the work that we do and say that we manage the risk of electric power for our consumers. We've always done that very well. We manage financial risk, market risks, operating risks. All these things that we do every day with our power plants and the power markets, and making sure that we can finance all the capital it takes to construct this great machine that we enjoy. But this new area of regulatory risk is one that's increasingly difficult to manage. And we are looking at all the options that we have, assessing new regulations that are coming at us, and making sure that when regulations are passed by the EPA or laws are passed through Congress or state legislatures, that they are set up to achieve the purpose, that they make real improvements that are needed in the environment, and that they can be done so at a cost that's reasonable. And today we see a number of rules coming from the EPA that simply don't pass that test.
And so when you say they're not based in science, like in my law practice, there's nothing more frustrating than regulations that either aren't clear, where the company doesn't know what they need to do to meet them, or that they become overly burdensome because, like you say, the company just can't meet those requirements because of science issues, or that's just not feasible for them. So when you say it's not based on science, can you just elaborate on that?
Sure. One of the hallmarks of the Clean Air Act is to go out and be able to create regulations that provide improvements in human health and the environment that are achievable. Yet we see now more standards being passed that industry may look at and say, these are not technically achievable. In some cases, you can't even measure what's seeking to be achieved. And we want to bring some sanity back to that. There's lots of examples. One is coal ash, or coal combustion byproducts. When we produce electricity from coal, a byproduct from that combustion of coal is coal ash. And coal ash is an incredibly valuable product to be recycled. If you're here in Denver and you drive down T-Rex, the rebuilding of I-25, you're driving on a bed that's largely made out of coal ash from power plants. Huh. It's a wonderful product to use in highway construction. It's been used out at Denver International Airport. It's a tremendous value. When we can't recycle the ash, we landfill it safely and store it permanently away. There's a debate right now and a push from the EPA to label coal ash as hazardous. But clearly it's not hazardous, and the EPA has never produced the data that would determine that it is considered a hazardous material. It's in our roadways. We've been safely dealing with this material for years. Yet the EPA is looking at, should we make this a hazardous material? Well, almost every state in the country, state government, that has coal operations in their state has pushed back to the EPA and said, no, we regulate this material fine. It is not hazardous. Don't do what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yet this push from EPA to look at should we regulate it as hazardous really just doesn't make sense. And some might argue it's one of many pushes to try to raise the cost of producing power from coal to the point where utilities like ours and others around the country will make another decision to use gas or some other fuel. Fundamentally, when we look at coal ash or any other regulation, we want to make sure that we have the ability, the option, to use the resources that are available in this country.
Sure.
We don't want to have any option taken off the table. To best serve our consumers, we want to be able to look at all the fuels and all the technologies and be able to make decisions that comply with the law that are in the best interests of our consumers.
Sure.
Doing that, we think that we can ensure the affordability of our product.
Absolutely. And Lee, you've talked about a couple of different things. You know, coal is obviously one of the ways that you're getting the power, but you also talked about gas and that. Can you talk a little bit about the percentages of how you generate electricity in terms of coal and gas and
Sure.
renewables, and what does the mix look like for you guys out at Tri-State?
Every utility is unique.
Yes.
And at Tri-State, we are largely a coal-based utility. And roughly about 65-70% of the power that we produce comes from coal in power plants that we operate. About 17% last year of our electricity came from renewable resources, including hydropower, wind, and solar. We also have purchase power contracts, and a small percentage of our electricity comes from natural gas. That's a growing part of our portfolio, but historically, given the characteristics of the loads that we serve, it's been most economical, and continues to be so, to generate power from coal and from hydropower. But we've developed a very large, one of the largest solar projects in the United States, a 30 megawatt solar photovoltaic project in northern New Mexico. We've got a wind farm out near Burlington, Colorado, another one being built in further north in northeastern Colorado. Renewables are a growing part, but coal and hydropower are a very important part of our overall resource portfolio. What we're most concerned about is that you see a push now to, frankly, take coal off the table,
Right.
not just for new generation, but looking at limiting what we can use today. And that's where we're concerned. Coal is an important part of being able to affordably and reliably meet our members' loads. We are leaders in ensuring that our power plants are clean burning. They have modern controls. We're constantly investing in efficiency improvements. That's an interesting point. You know, when you look at efficiency, a lot of folks think about I need to use a different light bulb, or I can do various things with my air conditioner, whatever it may be. All great moves. We've invested in our power plants and our transmission systems, and just over the past few years, we've eked efficiency improvements out of our physical plant to the equivalent of the power use of 10,000 homes.
Oh, wow.
So while we work,
and you eked that. 10,000 homes got eked out of that. That's great.
but it's a great story when you think about energy efficiency. We operate very efficient plants, and when we make them more efficient, we generate a lot of power. So even small improvements in efficiency can bring really big results, and we're very proud of that.
Yeah, as well you should be. Kelly, this is a fascinating conversation.
Yeah, I like to talk about the regulatory issues, and one thing that I'd like to talk about when we come back maybe is how do these regulations account for some of those efficiency improvements, or also do they account for the fact that you can put these you can integrate this technology into your generation facilities and make coal a cleaner product, and then also use those byproducts. Like it just doesn't seem that the regulations account for all of that positive, and they just focus on sort of getting rid of that resource, I guess, is
that's going to be an interesting conversation.
Yeah. So when we come back, we'll be talking more with Lee Bouhey from Tri-State Generation and Transmission Association. Kelly will be returning with me, and we'll be having that larger discussion. But thank you so much for being with us, Lee, in this segment, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Driving Force Radio, where we seek to discover every week what drives today's leaders. My co-host is Kelly De La Torre from ALG Attorneys here in Denver, Colorado. And Kelly, we're having a really interesting conversation with Lee Bowen, the Senior Manager of Corporate Communications and Public Affairs at Tri-State Generation and Transmission Association based here in Colorado.
Yeah, we've had a great conversation, and I think one of the key things that was emphasized in the first segment is the difference between our urban utilities that provide power to mostly the consumer base as compared to providing power to those rural areas of our state, and the needs are quite different.
The needs are quite different, and what I thought was interesting too is when they were talking about that there's been this shift over the history of this. You know, they're celebrating their 60-year anniversary this year, and there's been this shift, and now really only about 30 to 35% of their business is really focused on the residential side of things in the rural communities. And over 50% is really at these industrial, agricultural, oil and gas organizations that are out there building community and supporting jobs in rural America all throughout this 4-state region in Colorado, Nebraska, New Mexico, and Wyoming. And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, it really emphasizes the importance of getting electricity out to these rural areas. And what we were talking about right before break was more the choice in generation and the role of that technology plays. And welcome back to the show, Lee. Thanks for coming on. Could you talk more about the role of technology and how that fits in the tri-state model?
Sure. Well, technology is so important to what we do. I mean, it's important to what everybody does. Right. If you look at the innovation that you've seen in your own personal life, from your rotary phone 30 years ago to your cell phones today, I mean, you can't discount the pace of technology. That's happening in the utility industry as well. And you see it in the power plants we operate, you see it in the transmission system that we operate, and all the tools that we use. In particular, technology when it comes to environmental controls made dramatic improvements in air quality. We're very proud of that, and we've been very aggressive in installing new controls that make sense financially and serve the purpose to better the environment, reduce emissions. So we're very proud of that record. When you look at some of the challenges ahead, you can't look at energy production without talking about carbon.
Right.
We are making significant investments in assessing our ability to manage carbon should you have further carbon regulation. We do that in the interests of our consumers to make sure that we can manage those risks. But we're taking a very close look at a lot of different technological opportunities to be able to address carbon. From a project that's just now wrapping up that we had near our Craig Power Plant in northwestern Colorado, where we partnered with the University of Utah, the Colorado Geologic Survey, geologic surveys from states around the West, Schlumberger, Shell, all to do an assessment of the geology in the Rocky Mountain region for its ability to safely and permanently sequester carbon. We're looking at opportunities for carbon utilization. If it turns out it's too difficult to capture carbon and store it underground, what are the opportunities for taking carbon from power plants, whether they're gas or coal, and using that as a feedstock for other products? Mm-hmm. Take what's considered now a waste and turn that into an asset.
Yeah, sure.
Very creative thinking coming out of the cooperatives, and we're very interested in how technology can advance what we do. But it all comes back to the consumer. And how does technology allow us to provide this valuable tool of electricity and do it in the most reliable and cost-effective manner? Technology plays a huge part in that.
Well, and I love too that Tri-State is really employing this idea of innovation and sort of pushing the traditional box. You're out there thinking outside of the box. You're working collaboratively with all kinds of organizations all throughout the Rockies to try to come up with some solutions that make sense and address these issues that you've talked about. And when we were talking before, we were talking about some of the threats that are going on in the industry and the regulations and things. And I know that there's a lot of air regulations. And when you talk about, the waste that comes off of coal fire plants and things like that, what are some of these issues? How are air regulations going to affect the way Tri-State does its business and creates energy?
Well, we're high performers and we comply fully with all the environmental regulations that exist today. There's a number of new regulations that have been passed from the EPA that give us concern. Give you an example. We operate Nuclear Station. This is a power plant in southwestern Colorado. It's right near the towns of Nuclear and Natarita. If you're not familiar with that, that's about 30 miles north of Telluride and due west from Montrose. But it's tucked back in a beautiful part of Colorado. Nuclear Station has among the lowest emissions of mercury in the country. In fact, in the database that the EPA used to look at new mercury regulations, Nuclear Station tested at some of the lowest levels of any power plant in the entire country.
Wow.
It utilizes a circulating fluidized bed technology. It was actually part of a Department of Energy clean coal project many years ago.
Oh, interesting.
But it is a very efficient facility when it comes to emissions of mercury. And it helps set the bar, so to speak, for the new mercury rule. And we certainly, if you look at all of Tri-State's coal generation, are very strong performers when it comes to low mercury emissions. Yet under this mercury rule, our Nuclear Station is threatened. Not because of the mercury part of the rule, but because of the other things that EPA did on top of mercury that are going to raise the costs of producing power at Nuclear Station, potentially making it uneconomical. The challenge
So
here,
talk about that. What does that mean?
well, the challenge is that we believe that the EPA did not have the authority under the law to do what they did on these non-mercury emissions. So it's an example of overreach where you have a well-intended rule, so to speak, to make sure that you can regulate emissions of mercury from existing power plants. You've got a very strong performer that helps set the bar in our power plant in Nuclear. Yet, because of federal overreach at the EPA, doing things that they probably don't have, we don't believe they have the ability to do legally, the cost of that plant could go up, could make it uneconomical, and it threatens the jobs and the livelihoods of not just the employees at that power plant, but the coal mine nearby that feeds it.
Sure.
And frankly, if you look at the 100+ jobs that come from the power plant and the coal mine, in two communities where your population in each town is 600 to 700 people,
That's a huge
it
hit.
could have a tremendous impact and hurt people in western Colorado.
You bet.
So when we talk about our concerns about regulation, part of it is the fact that we just want to see rules that are fairly set, that again are based on sound science, that are done within the authority of the agencies like the EPA, so that we can do what we do to produce low-cost power. But when it also affects the rural communities and threatens people's livelihoods, we become even more concerned. And so, we are taking action. We filed a suit against the EPA seeking judicial review of components of this rule in a number of different areas, but the one that really hits home is the fact that you can have a rule that really directly affects people, even though you've got a very high-performing power plant.
Yeah.
So you scratch your head a little bit and you think, what are we really trying to achieve here?
Absolutely.
And so the aspect of overreaching, was that because the rule was supposed to be directed at mercury, but that it encompassed other emission components, or it was just because it seems like if you set the bar, I mean, I guess in a rational world, if you set the bar, that the regulations should go up to meet that, right?
Yeah, well, the rule was originally intended to address mercury emissions, and the rule does do that, but it goes on much further than that. It goes beyond mercury into areas where what the EPA hadn't done is determine a threat. When the EPA sets regulations, one of the things it has to do first is its homework. It has to understand that for any emission, any constituent, that at a certain concentration, it has an impact on human health and the environment. I think we can expect from our regulators that before anything is regulated in any aspect of our economy and our lives, that there's a purpose behind it. And what has not been done by the EPA is a determination that these other constituents that are being regulated, that there's an actual reason to do that. We think they need to go back, they need to do their homework before they overreach, and it affects not only our ability to generate low-cost, reliable power,
Sure.
but affects communities in which we serve.
Sure. So this, to me, brings up the issue of, and I don't think that the average consumer, because I mean, we all take electricity for granted. I take electricity for granted, and so I think it brings up the issue of how complicated this area is, in that we have to select our generation resources, but it's based on so many different things: the economics of the resource, the output of the resource, whether that resource is intermittent or whether it's a continuous output, and then it brings in those regulations that must make it so much more difficult for you to choose a generation source, and for you to have to switch a majority of your generation to something else. That would be such a huge impact. Can you talk a little
Sure.
bit about that?
Well, you know, it's interesting when you look at a utility, especially our utility, we're really agnostic when it comes to fuel.
Right.
We burn coal or gas or take power from hydropower plants or use renewable energy, whatever it may be, based on what makes the most sense to deliver that affordable, reliable product to our consumers. Now, coal is a valuable resource, but so is gas. Renewables have a role as well. Hydropower is very important to us. We're going to make our resource decisions based on our unique circumstances. And those, like you said, vary widely from utility to utility and have very complex factors. And it's not just what type of resource you choose or what the regulations are, but where you need it.
Right.
There's a spatial aspect to this. You have to look at transmission considerations, fuel supply considerations. It's tremendously complex, but we're very good at doing that. And the key to all of this, when you talk about regulation, you talk about resource planning, it's making sure that you have every option on the table so that when it comes time to make a resource decision, you're not artificially restrained into just one choice, which really isn't a choice at all.
So Lee, you know, you guys were just talking about the different various forms of ways that you get electricity, everything from coal to wind to hydro, and the importance of all of those. And that mixture in providing this low cost, very reliable source of energy to your consumers in the 4-state area. And I guess my question really is what are some of those issues around the electric transmission that's going forward as you bring renewables, or as renewables come online and become a larger part of the mix? I mean, I think we're seeing that nationally happen, but I think this larger conversation, and maybe I'm wrong, but you hear the conversation that wind and putting it onto the grid is so expensive and it's hard and solar's hard. And what does that mixture look like, and what are the issues with electric transmission going forward?
I think the key for transmission is that you have to look at it with a systems view. Transmission has a tremendous amount of value. It allows us to serve load. So the lights that are on here today, the lights around the western U.S., around the country, around the globe, we're serving load with transmission. So it's critically important that we design a transmission system that can do that.
Sure.
But you're also accessing markets. You're moving power around the region, around the country. So you've got to keep that perspective in mind. Reliability is critical. The stability of the electric grid is important. Interconnecting resources is an important part, whether they're renewable or conventional. The transmission system has to do all these different things. And too often we see individuals or organizations that just get focused on one aspect of that. Renewables is the best example. We need to build more transmission for renewables. Well, we need to build more transmission for the system, in our view. And if we do that right, it's going to support the interconnection of renewable energy. It's going to connect the next set of power plants that we need to construct. It's going to make sure it's serve load, and it's going to do it all in a reliable and stable manner. If you think about the electric grid, the western grid, which really starts in eastern Colorado and goes all the way to the Pacific Ocean and up to Canada and down into Mexico, it's one machine.
Right.
One single machine with utilities and power plants and transmission infrastructure all working together to take a product that's generated, transmitted, and consumed all at the speed of light.
Yeah.
It's a remarkable endeavor.
Yeah.
And we really can't be flipped when it comes to the transmission infrastructure that we need to build. We're very good at planning it out. We're doing all the things that need to be done to figure out what investments make the most sense. There's a lot of complex issues today too.
Right.
Big regional transmission systems, who pays?
Right.
Who benefits? A lot being sorted out right now. It's a very interesting discussion. But at the end of the day, utilities, particularly here in Colorado, are very well suited and very coordinated to help develop the next round of new transmission infrastructure to help us meet a number of objectives. The biggest challenge we have today is actually, once we plan out the lines and the infrastructure that's needed, is getting them constructed.
Yeah.
We're finding that a lot of the issues on the ground can present delays. Getting local land use permits, going through environmental processes can add years to a project. And we try to have a very open, transparent, and responsive process at the local level to be able to move projects forward as quickly as we can. Because at the end of the day, it's all for the public good. We're building these lines because they're needed to serve consumers, and we stay very focused on what their needs are.
Yeah.
Yes, that is always such an interesting discussion, because, like you say, it is this huge machine, and the question of who benefits is a really tough question, and especially with a territory as large as Tri-States, it's really interesting. I'm sure that keeps you on your toes. I want to kind of go back to the large industrial use in these rural areas, and then actually also the residential, and it ties in with the grid. Are there ways for the utilities to work with the large industrial users and the residential consumer to on energy efficiency issues, and then also on sort of demand response, so that the industry could cut their use at certain times? Or how does Tri-State look at that?
Now, we want people to use power as they best see fit. As a utility, we've got an important role to help them use electricity more wisely, so to speak. But I think at the end of the day, in our cooperative viewpoint, people are going to make the decisions that serve them best about how they use power. We want to enable them to use our product to advance their lives and grow their businesses and not be a hindrance to them. So the foundation to that is providing the affordable and reliable power that we do. But beyond that, we look for ways to help consumers and industry use energy more wisely. And so we have a number of products that we offer through our member electric cooperatives in energy efficiency and demand side management that can help change when you use power, change the time when you use power, allow you to be more efficient in your use. All these things are good for consumers, and they can be good for utilities as well, because we have a greater ability if products that are energy efficiency, demand side products are designed well, it helps us better manage our assets as well. So we can better plan how we operate our power plants. We have better control over when we might need to build new power plants, and it makes for a more efficient system. But fundamentally, we want to make sure that people have the power they need to do what they want to do to be able to better their lives, improve their quality of life, grow their businesses, and be productive.
So does that type of thing, does that also involve new technology, these demand response programs?
No, it does. It's remarkable. I mean, there's a lot of technology that goes into modern energy efficiency. Some of it's very exciting and very sexy. Some of it's, just improvements on things that have been done before, and simple steps that can be made that just change the way people use power, take better advantage of technology, and make a difference. It can be as simple as having time clocks on water heaters and thermal units that allow for consumers to, keep their homes warm and their water hot, using power, when electricity demand's a little lower and costs to us are a little bit lower, to working with irrigators on highly efficient motors and pumps for irrigating crops, to working with large industrial consumers on the very large motors that are used throughout the rural West to compress and move natural gas. So there's a lot of different things that we can do. And again, this is another area where it's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
Working with our member electric cooperatives, we think very hard about what are the range of tools that we can use to support our communities. One of the best examples is small town grocery stores.
Mm-hmm.
When you're across the rural West, the heart of small communities is often their grocery stores.
Yeah, you bet.
And grocery stores use a tremendous amount of power. So we've got programs that look at how you can adopt LED lighting into refrigeration cases, lighting throughout stores, other technologies that can help reduce the energy costs for small businesses like grocery stores and help to keep them competitive. It's an important part of having a thriving rural community, is making sure all these industries are healthy. And through energy efficiency and providing a low-cost product, we help to do that.
Well, and Lee, we only have a few minutes left, but here at ICOSA, we're always about the connection to the community and working collaboratively as business and academia and government and business all coming together to really try to solve an issue, solve a problem. And we've talked about a full gamut of things, everything from regulatory to what's going on in local communities at the nucleus station. Are there ways for your consumers in these cooperative areas to engage with Tri-State and their local cooperative to address the regulations, to address what's going on in nuclear? How can people learn more about what you guys are doing and how to get engaged in their local member electric cooperative?
We're thankful that cooperative consumers are already engaged, and they're working very closely with their local co-ops and participate in board elections. If you've ever been to an annual meeting of an electric co-op, it's a wonderful experience where folks from around the community come in to learn about their electric supplier and the issues that are facing it. So we work very closely with our members to help provide them the information that they need to help understand their electric supply and the issues that face it. Tri-State's website is www.tristategT.org. That's all together. And there's good information about our business on that website. There's also a website of an organization that we help support at www.keepelectricityaffordable.org. And this is an organization that's focused on informing consumers about the value of power, the value of keeping it affordable, and the threats and the solutions to preserve affordable electricity. So between Tri-State's website and keepelectricityaffordable.org, there's great resources for consumers to learn more about electricity, particularly out here in the West.
Absolutely. So last question, going forward, what is the role for the electric cooperatives here in the West and around the country?
Well, we're mission-based, and our mission stays the same. And we could be talking 50 years ago, we could be talking 50 years from now. Our mission is based around affordable, reliable electricity that we can deliver safely to our consumers. We're going to stay focused on that mission. The challenges will change over time, certainly, but we're going to stay focused on that core mission. It's what our member owners and their democratically elected directors tell us is their priority, and that's our priority.
I love that. Lee Bouhey from Tri-State Generation and Transmission. Thank you so much, and congratulations on 60 years of successful business.
Thank you.
It's been a great conversation, Kelly.
Yeah, so important to all of our communities in Colorado and the West.
Absolutely, and this rural conversation is huge. Like you said, we typically focus on these very urban areas, and so to take it out into the rural communities and think about those issues was a totally different conversation today. I loved it. So to learn more about Tri-State Generation, go to tristategT.org or keepelectricityaffordable.org. And to learn more about Kelly's work and the work that she does with women in energy here in the Rocky Mountains, it's wie.globalnewenergynetwork.org. And to learn more about ICOSA Magazine's work, go to theicosamagazine.com. Have a wonderful weekend, and thank you for joining us here at Driving Force Radio, where we seek to discover every week what drives today's leaders. Have a great weekend.